Hi, my name is Stephanie Liu, and I work on the YouTube APIs and Tools team. Today, I'll be going over some simple examples using the new Player APIs and the Chromeless Player. First, a little bit of background. Before, if you wanted to embed a YouTube video on your site, all you could do is choose one of our standard embedded players and put it there. As a developer, you really didn't have any insight about what was going on. Now, you'll be able to do much more. The JavaScript and Flash APIs that we've just released will allow you to control our embedded players. Issue commands like play, pause, seek to a specific position in a video, mute, set volume, get data like current time and how far the video is buffered. You can also subscribe to events like changes in the player state. Now, the Chromeless Player is a Swift with no player controls. So no YouTube buttons or our progress bar. You can put in your own buttons and customize it to fit in with the look and feel of your site. Okay, so let's get started with what the JavaScript Player API can do. So here we have the regular YouTube embedded player. I think everyone's probably pretty familiar with this. It plays, and now I'm going to show you how to set up this embed so that we can make API calls to it. The first thing you're going to need to do is include swiftobject.js. Now, we recommend using a Swift object because it makes embedding Flash content a lot easier. It'll take care of things for you like detecting the user's version of Flash. They're going to need version 8 or above to be able to see your player correctly. Now here is the div that the embed is going to live in. You'll notice we're calling it YT API player. We're going to need that later. And if they don't have 8 or above installed, they'll just see this line of text instead of a broken player. Now we're kind of getting into the meat of it. Here's where we're going to actually set up the embed object. You see here the parameters that we're going to have in the embed object. We need allow script access always. This means the YouTube Swift can make calls to your HTML page, and your HTML page can make calls to the player Swift. One of the attributes we want to set is ID for my YT player. This is going to be the name of the embedded object. You can use this to get a reference to the player via JavaScript using getElementById later on. Now, swiftobject.embedSwift will actually load the player from YouTube and embed it on your HTML page. Let me just go over all the parameters that you need here. The first parameter is the URL of the Swift. Enable JS API equals 1 just enables the player to receive API calls. Now, player API ID is the parameter that's going to be passed to on YouTube player ready as the first argument when the player is loaded and ready to go. Now, you want to name the player because if you are expecting multiple videos to be loaded on your page, you'll want to know which one has just told you that it's ready. The second parameter here is the ID of the HTML div that the embed is going to live in. As you'll notice, this is YT API player that we called up here. Then we got width, height, and the required version of Flash that the user needs. So remember that they need 8 or above to be able to see your content correctly. And then a couple of optional parameters we're not going to use, and the parameters and attributes we set up here. Okay, now that the embed is set up to receive API calls, let's do something a little bit more interesting. Let's issue some commands. So here I've added a couple of links. We can control the player using these instead of the buttons. Play, pause it, stop, mute, unmute. And so let me show you the really simple calls that need to be made to set this up. As I was saying before, once the player is loaded and ready to go, it's going to call on YouTube player ready. So here we're defining the function, and we're just going to grab the reference to the player and store it so that we can issue API calls to it. With that, we're ready to actually start making things happen. So this is how we set up those links. This is really simple, just a link with an on-click to this play function, and this is how we've defined it. We're just doing a little error checking, making sure it's not null, and then calling ytplayer.playVideo. It's that simple. Similarly, with pause, we got .pause video, stop video, and then mute and unmute. It's as simple as that to issue these commands to the player. Now that we've issued some basic commands, let's try to take some input and seek to 90 seconds into this video. And this is just as easy as the other commands, and I'll show you how to do that. So here's a little form we made to get user input on how many seconds to seek to in the video. We're calling the seek to function here, and we're just grabbing the value in the text box. And here's how we're defining the function, very similar to what we did before, ytplayer.seek2, the seconds that we just passed in, and whether or not we want to make a new request to the server if the seek2 position is beyond the loaded video. So now that we've issued commands to the player, let's try to get some data from it. Useful data to have is what the current time of the player is, how far the user is in the video. So if we hit play here, you'll see that the current time div here is updating. So to constantly display the current time of the video, we're going to go back to on YouTube player ready. We're going to add an interval for every 250 milliseconds. So every 250 milliseconds is going to call update current time, which just calls ytplayer.getCurrentTime and updates the HTML. You can also get other data like the duration of the video, the URL of the video, and the embed code. So now that we've issued commands to the player, gotten data from it, let's see how we can subscribe to events. In this case, let's have the player tell us every time it changes its state. So right here you can see that the player is in state 5, which is video queued. If I hit play, it goes into buffering, and then to 1, which is playing. I pause it, it goes into 2, and so on. So let me show you how to subscribe to an event. Now, if we want to constantly show the current player state, we're going to go back to on YouTube player ready, and we're going to add an event listener by saying ytplayer.add event listener. We're going to subscribe to the on state change event, and the on state change event is going to use our callback function right here and pass it the current state. And here we're just updating the HTML. Now you know the basics of the JavaScript API, how to issue commands, how to get data, and how to listen for events. The Flash APIs have all the same calls and the same functionality, but loading the YouTube player Swift into another Swift is a little trickier. Because of the architecture of the player Swift, using action scripts built in Movie Clip Loader will not give you accurate information about when the player is ready. So here's a snippet of code that loads the YouTube player into Flash. We create a new Movie Clip Loader here. Then we load a YouTube Swift into it and call it ytplayer. This listener will check every 250 milliseconds whether the player is loaded or not. Now this is the extra call that's not in the JavaScript API. ytplayer.isPlayerLoaded is what you should use in ActionScript to check if a player is loaded or not. Once this is true, we can go ahead and do all the things that I talked about before with the JavaScript API, like add event listeners. Now that you know all about our player APIs, let's talk about the Chromeless player. As I was saying before, the Chromeless player is just a Swift with no buttons. You can customize it to look however you want. So for example, on this site, they're using the Chromeless player, using their own buttons, and then using the player APIs to control it. So here's an example very similar to what we had before, except that we're using the Chromeless player. You'll notice that the buttons are gone and the progress bar. All that's left is the YouTube logo here in the bottom right-hand corner. It uses the same JavaScript APIs that we've been talking about, so I can control it with these links. Play, pause, and you already pretty much know how to set this up, except that the Swift URL is different. So let me show you that right now. So one thing that's different about the Chromeless player from the regular embedded players is that you need a developer key to access it. So if you don't have a developer key, head over to code.google.com and get one. It's free and really easy to sign up. Now this code should look really familiar to you. The only difference between embedding the Chromeless player in a page and embedding a regular YouTube embedded player is the Swift URL. So you can see here the URL for the Chromeless player Swift is gdata.youtube.com/API-player. Here's where you put your developer key. And then the other two parameters are the same. So now that you know how to load up the Chromeless player, let me point out a few differences from the regular JavaScript API. You'll see here, this is actually what the Chromeless Swift looks like when you first load it because it doesn't have a video ID in it yet. So there's a load video ID function that we can call. And there it goes. There's also a queue video function that you can call. So this just loads the thumbnail and grabs the video but doesn't start playing. To load a new video into the Chromeless player, we just call ytplayer.loadVideoById, pass it an ID, and optionally, where in the player we want it to start at. Similarly, for queueNewVideo, we call ytplayer.queueVideoById, pass it the ID, and where in the video we want it to start once the player is issued a play command. Hopefully, this gives you a good idea about what these new tools are and what you can do with them. There are a lot of things I didn't cover here, so be sure to check out the documentation on code.google.com.